Hello, hello. Alrighty, looks like microphone is working well. Good evening, you guys. Welcome to round two of these demos. What we're going to be looking at tonight is the progress on my old sketch, bringing it to digital, and how I've updated and what my process looks like. I also want to go over just a couple quick things, kind of looking at your submissions and what it is that you turned in so far. So thank you so much for getting those discussion posts in on time. I can't iterate enough or repeat enough that that is super important for this semester. There aren't going to be any extensions given, and it's really important that you guys continue to contribute and respond back to other students, as well as show your progress along the way on how things are coming along here. First week, you guys did a great job getting those in. Continue to make sure that that feedback that you're providing to other students is concise. There's a lot of stuff in there, kind of looking at some of the comments that you guys weren't really sort of calling out. And I think there's room to be a little bit more, not critical, but helpful with the comments that you are giving. Be honest with other people. We've got a lot of great artists and people with hand skills and drawing skills in this class. And I know that you guys have got a lot to say and a lot to be able to contribute. Just keep on doing that and stay up to date on both of those discussion posts. So each time there will usually be one of them that you see. Then within that discussion post, if you scroll down, there's a second one within there asking you most of the time throughout the semester to submit twice throughout each one of the projects to the discussion post before your final turn-in. I hope that makes sense. So first thing I want to talk to you guys tonight about is, again, picking good references for your illustrations. So looking at how you guys took your old sketches and then brought them into digital, looks like you're doing an outstanding job with that. But the reference photos, most of the times, if I got one, the reference photo that I got was some type of background image. And then we look at the picture on the left-hand side, and then there's a character there. And the character has nothing to do with this like background environment image. And what I want to encourage you guys to do is, as you are selecting reference images, make sure that if you've got a character within your scene, that you're pulling reference images to help inform how you're going to render that character. For example, right here, we've got a sort of gorilla-esque version of Chung Lee from Jock Millet. What a cool name. And this stylized rendering of the character is pretty simple, but there's also a lot of complexity going on within this. And this is why I commented out on so many of y'all's posts to try and find good references that are related, because there's a lot of unique things that this artist is doing with his color choices that you would not be able to come up with out of your own mind. When I go in and show you the progress on my piece, I'll show you how my reference image, how much I'm really relying on it to inform my drawing and my painting. Okay, and my painting choices and my color choices. But there's some cool stuff that I wanted to show you guys. Right now, I think that we're going to see a lot of flat coloring with one little shadow. But when we look into the way that this artist is doing their highlights, this is a very painterly method where we've got some tans in there, we've got some cool blues, we've got some purples, some sort of great purple that's happening in there as well. Our blue isn't just blue. It's got some tans in there, some greens. It's got purple shadows going on with it. They've done an excellent job with the highlights, but the highlights have got some bright orange, and there's really some nice layering. And this is what I want you to get you guys to thinking about, right? We've also got good rim lighting going on within the character's head over here. And this is the stuff that's really going to help you a lot. Even though this is a very simplified face that we're doing, there's still a lot of cool choices that are going on within the shading and the colors that, for where you're at in your creative journey right now, if you don't do these every single day, you might not think of this. There's some other really cool choices that they're making here also with this bright orange that's going on right on the edge of the shadow. I always love whenever I see that, and that's not something that my mind intuitively thinks of at first or doesn't really understand when and where to be able to use that. So anytime I see that, that's something that I'm really studying. I also love that the whites up on the buns on her hair have got all these blues. They don't just have gray in there. There's also some reds and some tans, and it's a really, really beautiful color scheme that's coming together. One of the other interesting things that they did with this painting is there's some really, really cool line work that's going on within the character's legs and some really neat, here, I'll show you the full painting now. Oh, that's a little animation. But here we go. So as we look at the kick coming down on the leg, the musculature is really well built up, but there's cool gradients that are going on here. We've got purples, we've got tans, and there's some really interesting things that are going on with the line work, as well as you can see it getting blurry up at here at the top. I know there was one person who had a character kind of air diving down or kind of kicking and trying to figure out where those feet were going to be at. This sort of blur effect is a really, really nice choice, but you can see that they didn't overly blur the leg. All those muscle details that are in there, it's still really well painted. They've just blurred it out just a little bit. So please, if you've got a character within your scene, do not just pick a background rendering. There was one background rendering that was like a forest with like some gray trees and some red and some green, and it didn't even have any shadows. And I was like, okay, what are we trying to pull from this? We've got, yeah, it's painterly, and I can see how the artist is making their marks, but this really doesn't inform the shadow or this level of detail that you guys are going to need as you move into digital painting. So please make sure if you've got a character within your scene that it is telling a story. And as predicted, we've got a lot of renderings. Here, I'll show you another really cool rendering over here. There's another nice one, just to get something fresh on the screen. But what I was going to say next is if you're going to be putting a character within your scene, please make sure that, just like we saw with that witch example from the last class or last session, that character that's on the screen is telling a story, right? The story that's going on here, really not that dramatic. It just looks like she's giving a battle cry, and it's sort of a character intro for a video game, but it's not that illustrative, right? Yes, we've got a cool costume. Yes, we've got a great rendering on the knives, and they've got awesome detail. The hair looks great. The lighting on this, it's beautifully rendered, but it's not that good of an illustration in terms of the story that it is telling. A lot of cool painterly techniques that are going on here, but not that illustrative. But for your paintings, this is something that you would want to grab onto to be able to help you, inform you how to be able to work through these characters, how to be able to work through the different materials that are on them, whether they've got leather or cloth. I also really like the way that it becomes more yellow on this highlight up on the left-hand side of the arm, and we're getting more of a neutral highlight going on this section of the side of the torso right here. We've also got some really nice clothing wrinkles that are going on throughout this section, and it's just a really, really solid render. Also with the way that the lighting is sort of dissipating, and this hair rendering is world class right here. I saw a lot of you guys within your illustrations struggling a little bit for how to be able to render hair. Get those references and make sure that they are illustrative references and not photo references, because you want to see how the painter is going through and solving for these things. Okay, I think that's enough on references. Let me show you what's going on with this painting now. So this was my original sketch for this thing. I went through and started finished up the line work. I'm going to open up my Photoshop file after I show you sort of these initial progress steps, and then show you kind of the breakdown so you can understand how I like to build up my file structure and why I like to be able to right click and show or get to the layers very quickly. So after that, I'm going to go in and I've got all my line work done within this piece. So previously, I had just started very quickly doing some of the line and some of the spot coloring on this thing. I went through and repeated that same process throughout it. Whenever I'm doing an environment, or if I'm doing an environment with a character, my favorite spot to start with these scenes is going to be the far background. All right. I like to begin as far back as I can possibly see and then work my way towards the front. The reason for this is that if I start just on the main subject matter, then I end up sort of, it takes up all my attention in my brain. And if I knock that out at the very beginning, then a part of my brain feels like the painting's done, and I won't take it slow throughout the rest of the areas. But so this has got the line work, this has got the flat color within there, and I'm starting to roughen the background just a little bit. One thing I want to point out to you guys is we can see just how much this over here, I've it almost looks like a 3D render. I'm not entirely sure. Some of it I think might be 3D with paint over the top of it, but I'm going through and I'm pulling my colors directly from my reference image. I'm not trying to make these up. You can see that there's a lot of similarities here, but I'm still adding my own spin to it and giving my own interpretation of this painting over the right-hand side to be able to create something new. You guys are totally okay to do this. You do not need to reinvent things out of the ether, out of your imaginations. That's what I want from you guys in this course, is that you are really studying these reference images and taking good notes on them and really seeing what you can discover, because there's a lot of things in this painting that I would not have otherwise thought of or considered on my own had I been doing this. So I'm taking sort of a general impression of these objects over on the right-hand side and just really looking at the color space. One of the things that I want to point out from this background scale is that I've got a really light blue here down at the bottom that fades up into a purple as we get up to the top of this thing. And this is some good atmospheric perspective that's going on right here, as the hazy blue water-filled atmosphere and air starts to mess with the sunlight as we move further back. Things become more gray, they become less saturated, certainly a lot more saturation in the foreground here. But this gradient, I thought was such a nice touch to be able to really add a sense of scale to these mountains in the back. And again, this isn't something that I would be able to come up with out of my own noggin. It really, really helps me a lot to be able to have a illustrated or painterly reference. I do not want to do this from photographs, because the photographs, man, there's just too much detail in them, and they're solving for things differently. We want to see how the artist is actually rendering and how this color space is working. So after I get my line work done, I block in my flat color, and then I start working from the background forward. So here is the next one as I continue to work forward within this illustration. And so you can see that I've got my background a little bit more completed. Let me show you before and after. So we've got those mountains over on the left-hand side. I've added in some more clouds. We'll talk about those clouds in just a sec. And I'm just very quickly going through and roughing things in, right? I'm thinking about my highlights. I'm thinking about my lowlights. And I'm not touching the foreground at all at this stage, but I'm making some adjustments and really working my way through, knowing that I'm going to have the brightest portions within my foreground. So these clouds over here within the background are a really cool example. I'm using one of the textured brushes, but then I'm going back and I'm retouching that textured brush with my smudge tool just to be able to loosen it up and to feather the edges a little bit so that it doesn't look too tight and too compact. The same thing is happening here, where I'm keeping some of my edges hard, but then I'm softening up a lot of my edges as well within the clouds so that they don't command too much attention and don't feel too stiff when we actually look at them. From here, within these islands, you can see that there's an interesting color buildup that is happening. That's really important to me. So one of the things that I want to do is I want the light to hit the water and then to bounce back up. So there's always a little bit of this blue from the water that's starting to move into the shadow areas, and it's helping to connect these islands to the water and to this section a little bit better. One of the other interesting things that I want you guys to start thinking about within this course is the idea of local color and moving away from that, right? We are not restrained by local color, and a lot of times things will look a lot prettier if we don't do that. So one thing that I noticed from my reference image when I'm checking my colors and pulling these shadow tones is that they're almost to black here. And I know that for something this scale, for this large, to get true distance in there, that the ambient occlusion within the lighting, that's the idea that the light is sort of wrapping around these objects and trying to get into the shadows, but can't quite. And then we've got the atmospheric perspective mixing in with it as well. I know it sounds like a lot, but I know that something that far away doesn't need to have a true black on it. So one of the changes that I've made to this painting is I'm not working from my reference images true blacks. Instead, I'm going with a darker purple that's more akin to the dark shadows that I'm using up here at the front, because I know that I can always darken that stuff if I need to later on. But my shadows are purple for the most part. This is a purplish gray that I'm using here. And this is the idea of getting away from local color, that the rocks are going to be gray, the sky is blue, the water is blue. That's not entirely true when we look at illustration, right? So within this water itself, I've got a lot of sort of yellowish greens that are going on here to sort of infer that the water is more shallow there and there's maybe a sand dune. I'm mixing in a lot of purples because I'm trying to pull some of these purples from up here in my background down into my water to make it look right. I've got some really, really deep aqua colors that are going on. And, there's a lot more work that's going on into this than you would initially sort of think if you're just saying, all right, water is blue, use the wave brush and then, work our way through it. That's not going to get you entirely where it is that you want to be with this. I find myself, whenever I get to this stage within a painting, I start to get really excited and my brain starts to work with the problem solving. And like I have a hard time pulling away from the painting at this stage. Once I get too far into it, I very easily could have finished this thing today if I just kept rolling on it. But I was like, no, I think I'm at a good spot to be able to show you guys some stuff. So here is where the painting is at now. I want to go through and start doing some work on the plane as well, just to be able to get that central object in there. Again, I'm thinking of it as I'm working my way from the very back towards the front. And some of the other things that I'm keeping in mind that I'd like you guys to focus on here is the shape language of the lines and the marks that you're making, right? So that's something I try and keep in mind when I'm doing and creating these rock formations over here. There's lots of rock tutorials. I think painting rocks are an absolute great way to learn how to be able to really navigate and understand lighting and different forms and edges on an object. But there's some cool sort of textural shapes that are going on down here at the edge of the water. The same thing is happening where this is not a smooth sort of gradient sort of fill, but instead I've got a lot of colors going on within this column that's happening up in here. I'm also leaving some room for some texture within it as well, and leaving some of the edges just a little bit more rough. And I'm not satisfied with just leaving this section, totally one color. I've got 3 different tones. You can see this within here. So there's a tan, and there's a lighter color, and then there's some blue that's going on over the top of it, just to be able to really give it a good visual mix. Now, as we start to look at the reference image, we see that the same thing is going on within this pillar, and that's one of the things that's making it look so nice, right? Our shadows are not just brown for this brown pillar. We've got purples, we've got reds, we've got pinks going on in there. There's a lot of cool stuff that's going on, but I really love the way that our highlights within this thing are picking up that tan and the red, and that's sort of what makes me think this might be a 3D render that has some paint work that's been put over the top of it. But yeah, so from here, I want to be able to show you guys sort of what that process looks like. You can line out, so do the line work all on one layer. It really just depends on your working process. But for me, what I've gone through and done is I've got my lines on different layers. So it's a little bit hard to see the lines within the background. Let me turn off my my color overlay on those lines. Give it a color by right clicking on the eye, just in the eyeball section. And now you can see all my line work going around those pillars in the back. I've turned the color to something that more closely matches the background. So this is a bit of a funky painting. That line work is still there and it's still present, holding these pieces together. But you can see how strong and sort of distracting it looks when I almost like a cell shading, right? When I turn it on all the way, there's some really, really cool line work that's going on there that sort of disappears, but that's okay. I'm totally fine with losing some of these details and some of these pieces and just letting that stuff fade back into the background. Each one of my layers has got their own set of line work. The lines actually become, I think I'm going to leave these guys the color that they are here within the foreground, but yeah, so the line work is going to be really, really dark in the foreground because that's where I want the most contrast and to sort of pull the viewer's attention forward towards the piece. And now you can really see how I've got these different sections blocked out. We can see that pillar that's starting to come in there. One of the cool things that I'm doing with the pillar here in the middle, again, just like we saw with Chung Lee there a second ago, is getting that secondary lighting moving up through it. And one thing I always try and keep in mind with the secondary lighting is we don't need to run all the way up, right? It's not a super bright thing if it's bouncing off the water, but giving a little bit of that coming from the underside over here and just helping to highlight some of my forms and shapes really goes a long ways to be able to make these pieces stand out. Another thing that I'm doing with my plane, you can see I'm using some of that same bounce lighting. However, this is much stronger. The stone is not going to be nearly as reflective as a rusted metal plane. And I'm trying to build my way into these rusted textures. This is where having the navigator open really comes in handy. And there's probably going to be some things that are going to happen within this painting that are going to change and push as I continue to develop this thing out. So right now I've got a good base, a good general kind of shapes and colors working very, very loosely on this plane and starting to build up those different color forms. I'm pulling the color forms from other areas within the painting. I decided to make the top of the plane more of this tan color just so that it blends in with the rest of the piece. If it was just a pure gray, then it doesn't quite match in the same way that I want it to with the rest of the painting. I hope you guys can see that. Now, I haven't started developing out any of the details on the windows, the door. I kind of had an idea of making the door like it's open, or make the you know how they have the yellow slide, the inflatable slide that comes out of the door, and have that still hanging on and kind of trying to blow away. But I think that's going to be a little bit distracting. One of the other things that I noticed too is that within my sketch, I had a lot more tree forms. I think that I was trying to go in, here, let's turn this up a little bit more. Yeah, so you can see on the tree form, they were going all the way up over and covering a good section of this. I think I had a larger tree form going in the back, over the back of the wing also, and then more foliage. Yeah, there's a lot more that goes up within that section. So likely I will go ahead and paint those in. I don't think it's going to hurt anything because we've got a lot of negative space that sort of needs to be filled in this section. Within the reference image, they filled that section with birds flying through, which I thought was a nice touch. But that's really what I want to get started on today, is taking this pillar and this plane and working our way into some of those details. I hope this is helpful for you guys. Before we get into the actual painting part, I want to show you just a layer breakdown of some stuff that I've got going on here. So each time to be able to get to my layers within Photoshop, very rarely will you see me actually scroll or have to look for anything in here, because I'm using a right-click button on my mouse. It's not a Mac and I'm not using a trackpad. I've got a mouse. And when I right-click if I hit V on the keyboard, I get to the selector tool. When I right click, I can see my various layers. Right now, these are not numbered, but this selection, as long as I have auto select turned off, are going to be related to my painting. So what I'm going to see here is that is my base color for this pillar in the back. And then after that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to start working in my shadows and my forms. And you can see how loose I'm working at first. There's really not a whole lot of detail that I'm really trying to go in and put into these. I'm just trying to get something, especially right here, that is catching the light. And I'm thinking about how the light is going to become brighter and then less dense if it's not turned. After that, I'm leaving room. I'm sort of discovering where my shadows are going to be, where my highlights are going to be, to be able to go back and highlight those sections just a little bit more, right? So you can see how I went back and added more highlights right over here, over on that left mountain. There's that highlight layer. That's what it looks like, just isolated by itself. And each one of these layers, or each one of these pieces, are on their own layer. So I have, if I hold down the control button and click on the icon for the layer, then I can select that entire layer at one time and sort of isolate that layer to be able to paint within it. And I'm just going through and doing some work. I'm kind of going over here on the left-hand side, hitting the eye tool, and then grabbing one of my colors. I might double check it just to make sure kind of where that color space is at within my color picker over here. And I'm seeing the difference, right? So if that one's there and this one's here, those are two different colors. And then I'm going in and I'm trying to pick, okay, well, I don't want to go into my super bright highlight right away. I want something that's a little bit softer to get me in there. They've also got this really nice sort of bluish green color that shows up on this mountain within the reference image. Yeah, you can see all that foliage that's starting to show up in there. A lot of green within this section also. And they've got some green rolling hills that are going on. So this might be something that I want to go back and add to this piece later on as sort of a final touch, is folding in some of that green too, to those pillars off in the very, very distance. But yeah, it's really kind of surgically going in, looking at your reference image, really studying the heck out of it, and seeing how much you can pull from there. So real quick, just for a fast recap, we'll do some more of that line work over the top of the bushes, and then we will get to painting this trunk and the foliage. And I think that's going to do it for this evening, is talking you through how to be able to handle this foliage, why I'm doing things the way that I am here. And that'll be enough of a demo. I don't want to keep you guys around too long just watching me paint, but sorry, I can see that'll get us through for tonight. All right, so just a quick recap. Line work first, right? So I'm going to go in, I'm hit V on the keyboard. I've got my arrow selected. There it is, trees line. They've got a color overlay on them also. That's what the tree line looks like in red. And from here, I'm going to turn back on my reference image. And that up, turn this guy down. There we go. All right, trees line. And we're working in red right now. And let's get some of that back foliage. Oops. Looks like I need to turn my brush up. Right now, I'm using the brush MB Line Art Rough for a lot of my shading, but for this, the hard round brush will do me just fine. So I'm being sure and careful to keep my shape language very similar for this portion of the painting. Make sure that I'm closing my shapes out all right. That'll work. And all of that stuff looks the same, but I did have more plant that was going on over here. There we go. So just a little bit more covering up that section of the plane. It's a little bit dead and just sort of dead space. So that line work looks a little bit thicker than what I had on there previously, but I think once we turn it on and cover it back up, we'll be okay for this. Anywho, so next up, I'm going to go in and I'm going to start. I've got my magic wand tool selected over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to hold down Shift and just to be able to get multi-selections going on. That all looks pretty well selected. I'm going to go to my select drop down up here at the top and go to modify and expand. I want to expand it. This is by 2, but we could expand it more if we wanted to. I hit I on the keyboard just to be able to grab that green, and now I'm going to get my paint bucket selector and I'm going to fill all that stuff in there. So now I've got a nice filled piece. That does look a little bit better hiding out the tree, or hiding out some of the plane and making it feel like it's really stuffed into that tree form. I like it. I think that's going to work well. And now I'm in a good spot to go in and start painting in this tree and the trunk. I want to work my way up each time. So at first, I'm going to do the trunk. And again, I'm hitting V on the keyboard, right-clicking, and going to layer 20. I'm clicking on that flat filled in space, and it looks like we've got all this foliage that's been filled up at first. I'll do the darker foliage first, or sorry, later on. For now, I just want to solve for the trunk. All right, So when I get in here and actually look at the tree trunk, they've made some weird choices. All right. So we can see just a little bit of this tree trunk that's starting to show up. You can also start to see the 3D render that they've painted over. I don't know exactly what they did here to be able to get this final rendering, but we've got a darker color and then we've got some other kind of pine tree looking shapes within the bark line. I'm going to pick the darkest, reddest one first. And from here, I want to go back a little bit on my tree. So next thing that I want to do now that I have my color selected is create a new layer just above where that tree trunk is at. And I'm going to go back into that MB line art rough one. All right, MB line art rough. The legendary one works really well also. And in the beginning, I'm set to 100% here. I just want to go ahead and make some big choices, right? You don't always have to do this at 100%. Sometimes you can sort of bring it down to like 52% and work your way into it. So this color, I'm not really too happy with it because it doesn't match and it doesn't go along with anything else really within the composition up until this point. The green that was there before, the base color is a lot more accurate to the leaves and the foliage. So I know that that color will get used throughout this thing, but I'm just sort of covering it up right now. So let's make a quick adjustment here. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to go to Image, Adjustment, Hue, Saturation. So under the drop down, this is one that you'll see me use a lot throughout this semester. I like this one. There's another color selector within Photoshop. You can mess with the levels too. This is the easiest one visually for me to be able to understand, but that is again under Image, Hue, Saturation, Adjustments. So from here, I can start to mess with my color forms. So I can start to push those colors. The purple is sort of nice. I can also drop down the saturation. That's kind of cool. Maybe just a little bit of saturation. I can make it lighter or I can make it a little bit darker. Right now, I think I'm fighting against the darkness of that foliage that I know I'm going to lighten up a lot later on. And yeah, that looks a little bit better. So let's hit Control Z and we can see how that red, when we zoom back, really wasn't doing us a whole lot of favors. I'm gonna go to Edit and Redo to open it back up. And now that tree trunk is really starting to fade back quite a bit more. It's not starting to push forward like it was just a moment ago. And the next thing that I want to do on this tree trunk is give it some highlights. Let some light actually hit it. And for this highlight, I'm going to work from that olive green and I'm going to go up and over quite a bit. So that's pretty bright. Let's see if I can't push that down into more of a warm yellow color. It still has some green on the inside of it. I think I've got a new layer here. Yep, I'm working on a new layer. And now I'm at 52%. Let's go up to 76%. I'm just going to add some rim lighting on the edge of this tree trunk just to make it glow and it's catching some of the light a little bit more. So if we really want to get fancy with our lighting here, my shadows are the same on the front as they are on the back of this tree currently. And one of the things that I can do is I can take my opacity and bring it down to 26% and start to do a wash over those shadows. So this way, the brightness that's going on within these shadows on the front of the tree, that ambient occlusion again, isn't quite as strong. And so I'm going to paint some of this stuff away. You can see how I'm starting to get a really, really nice textural look building up on this tree form very, very quickly. Starting to look pretty nice. The last thing I might want to do is just add a little bit of blue over on the back of this just to bring in some of those blue tones that I've been using everywhere else within this painting. I know it doesn't quite match with the bounce lighting that we talked about earlier, but just to be able to break it up just a little bit is going to be nice. So from there, let's zoom back out and we can see that we're getting a pretty nice tree form that, you know, it's maybe a little bit too detailed compared to the other items within this piece. It feels like the bark is really, really strong. So I'd likely need to simplify this just a little bit more. I'm going to grab that brown that I'm using over here. I'm going to go back to my base layer. That's layer 20 for the tree, grab it again, and let's go over the top of those two just to be able to soften it up. Give it quite a bit more color. All right, there we go. So that's actually removing a lot of the detail on that tree. I can mess with my layer interpretation now and see if I like a different version of it. But I don't want that tree trunk to pop out too much. It's not that important of a detail within my piece. So being able to know when some things are overly detailed and when you can let them drop back is a great rule of thumb when you are painting. All right, yeah, that'll work fine for me. Last detail here is that went over the line work. All right, I'm going to take my highlight layer and I'm going to just push the edge highlights on this tree just a little bit further, just so that they pop and they really feel like they're getting the lighting. It's a nice little touch. Okay. So from here, we are on to the bushes, the big old foliage up on top. And I thought this would be a good one to do for you guys this evening. How to be able to work your way through abstract foliage can be a really, really useful thing. It's almost as useful as painting clouds. You know, it's funny when you have been painting clouds for a number of years, you look at a sunset and you think, man, if I actually painted that, people would think that I made a mistake. When it comes to foliage, and with a lot of the things that we're doing with painting, what we're going to see here is are really creating abstract shapes, right? This is a whole hot mess of little shapes and patterns that are going on here that are tricking the human brain into thinking that this is actual plants. When we look at it back at this scale, it looks believable. It's a tiny little detail. It's not the focus of the painting, and we're getting the idea that there's foliage built up there. This is getting me excited to go back in and start working some more of that foliage through my piece. But I really, really like the Dr. Seuss shapes that are going on within the tree right now. And so next thing, I've got sort of a good middle color that's happening on all these tree branches. I want to go in and start adding some shadow. When I look at my reference image here, I've really got two trees that are sort of combined within this. I used the olive green here, but we've got another green that exists within it, and then there's some black and sort of some dark blue that's going on. At first, I'm going to try this sort of aquamarine color since I'm using that so often throughout the rest of the painting. And let's see what that feels like. So again, hitting V on the keyboard, getting to my selectors tool, right clicking, and then I'm going to hold down Control and click on my icon. This will start to hopefully become pretty automatic for you guys. At first, I'm working non-destructively within Photoshop, so I'm going to create a new layer. And then from here, I can go in and I can start painting and making some choices on this tree. So when you see my brush, right, I'm just doing these light little strokes on these trees, on this foliage. And I know that down here, this is where the light isn't really going to be able to hit. If the light is coming from the top left-hand side and down, we're not going to see as much light on these trees. And this is my chance to really start to build in some of those leaf forms and where they're catching the light within the shadows. That went really, really fast. And they're sort of triangular since I'm doing these palm tree shapes. The same thing is going to happen within this one. Okay. So on this one, I've got this big old foliage. I know that most of the light is going to hit here and, you know, be coming from this side. I can imagine within my mind that this is sort of all shaded over here, right? So if this shape is where the light can't penetrate to, and it's kind of getting held up at, same thing is going to happen right over here, even though this is moving towards the brighter portion of the plane. Same thing can happen with this one. Let's just pick a side that these leaves are going to be on. There you go. And so now I want to make some more choices. And I'm just going to decide, okay, so if that's sort of a palm shape, maybe I can have some more of that palm shape that's going on over here and bend and pull it back in. Okay. I'm keeping an eye on my color forms that I'm using right now. So I want to make sure that my shape language is interesting, that it has a good rhythm. And when I talk about shape language, if you've never heard this term before, it's sort of the idea of like Japanese calligraphy, right? So they spent 2,000 years about working on line form, giving it an energy, giving it kind of a chi whenever you make a brush mark. And that's really what I'm trying to create here within these brush strokes is for the plants is, yeah, am not going to sit here and render every single leaf out. Instead, I want to make sure that there's just a good balance, and rhythm of shapes is going to mean a lot more to the viewer's eye. I know that I can highlight a lot of this stuff over here. That's going to be pretty bright, and I don't want to overdo it in the shadow stage. This stuff is all going to be in shadow. You can kind of think of the shadows too, in the same way that we lay in the base color. You still got a lot of options, just like you saw with that tree, to where, you know, it's not right always the first time. There might be, I'm keeping an active dialogue going on within what it is that I'm painting. So sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. And I think that that active dialogue while you're painting, continue to move forward and make decisions. Don't get stuck staring at it for 6 hours. You know, do that after you've been working for 6 hours, but and go to sleep thinking about it. Got some highlight to hit right here, and then I know that this back portion of this I want to be in shadow. This guy right here can be getting highlighted right moving forward. This section, let's leave it pretty much all in shadow. And that's the idea of sort of 70-30. As I'm working my way through these leaf forms, maybe a little bit of highlight right there. This back portion, it can start to get some highlight, but I just want to make sure that I'm painting in some shadows along the way. Maybe here where it starts to drop back. Thing with this section. There we go. So I think that that feels pretty good. Except for those last drop lines, of course. All right, so that is going to be my abstract lines for the shadows on this plant. Okay. You know, right now this is pretty bright. The shadows aren't really reading. I'm sort of just meandering my way around them. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to grab this darker color that I have from the front, and I'm going to do a second pass on those shadows. So same deal, I'm now selecting my shadow layer, and I'm going to do another one just on top of it, just to be able to really get some of those darker areas dark like I need them to be. Just to be able to help highlight the form. And again, I'm working non-destructively here, so I can always go back and change this stuff up later on, but I just want that ambient occlusion where the light can't get to and can't actually hit. To be there. Kind of thinking where are these shadows pulling back to. There we go. Break that up just a little bit. And in a second, go back and do this. All right, so we still got the highlights to do, but just that little extra bit within the leaves helps to start to define and make some decisions. Next thing I'm going to do is one more pass on this, and this is going to be one of the few times that I use the airbrush. I really do not like using the airbrush within these paintings, but this is a good situation for it where I just need to create some quick gradients coming out of some of these pieces. All right, there we go. Otherwise, yeah, almost there. Okay. Yeah, so that darkened it up just a little bit. That's what I want. You can see how each one of these passes is really helping to build up that foliage. So I'm going to leave all those dark shadows on their same layer. Maybe I want to go back with this middle tone here and do something later on with it. But for now, I think I'm in a pretty good spot to go in and start adding the highlights on that foliage. And this is the cool part, right? I'm gonna hit save, always save your work. And this is why I recommend working with this strategy when you're doing 3D stuff. So though that flat green that we had just a moment ago on this thing, now all of a sudden that looks like the highlights right now within the plane. But once we go back and add this brighter layer of the highlights within here, all of a sudden we're really going to see the form start to take off. When I'm thinking about the highlights, I'm thinking about where's the light hitting the most and when does the light start to dissipate and where can't it quite get to where there's sort of lesser highlights is a good way to think about it. So once again, going back over here to my reference image, and you can see that this is one of the brightest pieces within this entire painting. This little yellow right here is acidic as all get out. That is super top left. So I don't want to, excuse me, I don't want to use that one right away. Instead, let's use something that's sort of similar, somewhat related to it. We've got another really bright yellow here, some really bright blues that are going on. Here's a bright, bright green. I think that one's going to be almost super acidic. That's almost up to white. But yeah, let's go with that one, and then we can mute it a little bit if we need to as we start to work through the highlights on this tree. So there's my base layer on the tree. I'm coming back to that, and I'm going to hold down the control button, click on the icon, and I'm going to start working over the top of where those shadows were at just a moment ago. My brush right now, I'm using my fuzzy brush. Again, I want to get away from that fuzzy brush. If you overuse the fuzzy brush, you're really going to be able to see it. So I'm using the MB Line Art Rough once again. Oh boy, that is a super bright green. Oh my gosh. I know that the brightest portion is going to be up here at the top of the plane where the left, visually left wing is at. All right. Again, just doing a, I'll use better line shape here. So you can hold down the shift key. I don't want to keep this up for too long and get those sticky keys turned on. You can hold down the shift key, and that'll allow you to be able to, with the magic lasso, add more to your selection. So same deal. I made all that stink a second ago about having good line shapes, and I want to keep that same thing going. So each one of these little sections that I'm going in here and painting, I'm really trying to think about, what is the line rhythm that I'm creating between the negative and the positive space within something like this. Trying to keep that palm pattern going as much as I can. Ideal. We knew that we wanted to get some highlights going on with this guy. Palm pattern. A little bit of it hitting over here. So one thing you might have noticed while I'm working is that I am constantly painting while I'm doing this. I am thinking, not really two steps ahead, but instead just sort of working my way through all these pieces. I'm a little bit closer in on the painting than I probably need to be for this part, and it'd probably help me if I backed out a little bit while I'm doing it. But work out like this and really see how those highlights are starting to come together and really show off the shape choices that we're making here. Looking good. I love it when an idea comes together. So I'm going to just add a little bit of it here and there as if the light's just catching it just a little bit within these sections. There's little spots of detail will really come together to help this out a lot. And now I can start my bigger section. This larger, brighter section up here at the top is going to really, this is what's going to get some of that super bright acidic yellow I want to pull the viewer's eyes towards this part of the painting. I'm doing a base color here. Just like we did with the tree trunk, I'll likely go back and add some color variation within this because it is feeling a little bit boring with just this one color green going throughout the entire thing. It's not quite as interesting as I know I can make it. All right. Oh, that's looking okay. Let's get that same deal of some of the just random bright highlights that are starting to hit, just to be able to break up some of these big areas of blue. Get the one right there, kind of a neat shape. All right. It's becoming a little bit too repetitive. Let's see if we can't terminate this in an interesting way. Okay. And then we've got some back here that are just starting to get a little bit of the light. So this is that part where the light starts to dissipate. I've gone through and done all the brightest portions. Maybe over here, there's a little bit of brightness that's starting to hit it. So that'll work well. And maybe just a little bit right here. But now I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn down the opacity. I've been working with my brush at 100% with that NB line art. The NB line art gives you a little bit of leeway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm working at 46%. So this is half the brightness. Also got my pressure turned on. Go in, finish off some of these lines here. There we go. That's not quite as strong as it was. And let's off click to see how this is looking. Ooh, wow. We definitely worked our way through that tree really, really fast. But it does look pretty even, right? When we zoom back and look at this thing, we can see that all those greens are the exact same tone. They're really not all that sort of visually interesting to look at, and we want to vary this just a little bit more. So when I look at this guy, there's still some highlights, but we've got some tan color that's going on here that I think is pretty interesting that might help to soften some of that super bright green that I just put in here. And let's give that a go and see what happens as I go back to my painting. So we got all our layers highlighted. Yeah. Saw this trick online one time. No. Where somebody was painting on the inside of a layer that they just created. All right. Anywho, so I'm working on a new layer on top of those greens, and what I'm going to do here is just sort of paint in. I'm still at 46%, painting down some of those highlights, especially as I get closer to the blue. And I'm painting and pulling them back. All right, so let's turn this off, look at it again. And yeah, I think that helped to soften those highlights quite a bit. So here's with them turned on, just a little bit too acidic, and that just sort of tones down some of those highlights quite a bit. They're still there, they still function and still work, but they're not quite as bright. Let's just try a quick layer interpretation to see if we get any other kind of variant that I think is interesting. This is one of those where I needed to zoom back and look at my full composition. Now, this could change. Look, that's kind of nice with the more saturated green. Too much. Sort of nice seeing the white there. I like that one. Turn that down just a little bit. And I think that might be trick. No, let's leave it on normal. And we can still infuse that white where I want the highlight to really, really show up on this tree now. So let's go back over to my reference image again. And let's start pulling some of that super bright white. Hit I on the keyboard. There's the bright white, that lemony yellow, not quite up into the super acidic color yet. And yeah, with each one of these, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 layers on top of this on these trees to be able to build it up. Here's the 5th one. Moving into my super bright highlights, I'm going to turn my opacity up to 100% again, and I'm going to work with my full tree selected. I'm on a new fresh layer. I'm up to 51 layers within my scene as of now. Thank you. There we go. And so now I'm starting to really paint in some of those super bright highlights. I want the light to really, really hit on this thing. I'm not going to put these everywhere because otherwise we're going to run into that same situation that I did a second ago where it's all just a little bit too even. I think that's going to create some nice contrast with the windows. And yeah, I'm just about done with that color, I think. I don't want to add too much of it on here. Maybe just a little bit. And just a little bit. Okay. So let's turn it off and let's zoom back. Yeah. Without it, what I love about working in Photoshop, make these decisions. All right, pretty good. And now let's go in for that super bright acidic yellow that should finish us off for this tree. And we're getting a really nice tree form that's started to exist here. I like it. Maybe there's a few more choices that I can make along the way, like brightening everything up in the top left-hand side as the light really starts to penetrate through all these trees over here, but we'll do that in just a moment when it comes to building and editing. So for this super bright canary yellow, I really don't want to use this too much. Yeah, that's where it's going to have to be. I'm just building into those highlights that I already established, just adding just a little bit of that yellow in here. If I overdo this, it'll become too acidic and it'll be hard for people to be able to look at, but just little tiny flakes of it, I think, work okay. So there we go. And that's helping us to feel that sun light on this just a little bit more, and that looks pretty nice. Okay, next thing is I'm going to go back to my selector, right click on layer 46. That's my dark blue color. And for here, I'm going to use the dodge tool. So this is kind of a cool trick to do at the end with the dodge tool is this is all flat color based on that initial line work. But now that I've decided where the light is going to come from, I can brighten up my shadows over here, and I can go back and use my burn tool be able to really darken some of these shadows where I don't want the light to hit quite as much. Maybe just a little bit down here. There we go. So that's helping to get the form and the shape on this tree pretty well. And then yeah, there's line colors on the tree up here towards the top are still a little bit too dark, and that thick line is showing up for me a little bit too much. So I'm going to now right click. I've got my color overlay on this. I'm going to right click on this tree layer and I'm going to go to rasterize layer style. Okay, so now my dark green is locked in there. And let's use that same trick that I did just a second ago with the, not the burn. I'm holding down the left click to be able to open up between the burn and the dodge tool. And now I'm going to use that dodge tool over here on my leaves, just up at the top, so that where the light is hitting it in the brightest portions, especially right up in here, it's a pretty bright leaf too, the line work becomes considerably lighter. And we can see that we're creating a light gradient going through the tree's line work. And yeah, starting to give us some good contrast there. I want to leave that. But that dark line isn't quite there and isn't quite as it connects back into the sky and helps those recede and work their way down just a little bit more. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that turned out for painting in the tree portion of this. It's going to be very similar with how I'm working my way through all the different sections within this painting. Let's see here. So that dark blue part right in here, this whole little layer, really feels like I could hit the eraser tool. I've got my fuzzy brush for the eraser. And what I'm going to do now, oops, brush opacity 50%, is just start to drop some of those shadows out up at the top. I just don't think they're quite as important. And then I've got my base layer that's starting to come through just a little bit more. Same deal. I can use my dodge tool just to really be able to push those colors up here. I don't want to totally dismantle the shades and the tones that I'm creating, but I do want there to be some sense of lighting as we move through this thing. So I'm taking my base olive green layer on the tree, using the dodge tool just a little bit just to be able to lighten it up. And that's a nice little polish trick that you can do here at the very end for these things. There we go. So that's giving it just a little bit more brightness as it comes down to the base of the tail. And when we look at this, we've got a really nice tree form within the painting that feels like a bunch of leafy sections that are laying over the top of one another, even though it's just a bunch of abstracted shapes and lines. But because I'm thinking in terms of where the light and where the light cannot get to with the ambient occlusion, where the light is really coming from, where's it going to be the brightest portion, and working all that stuff in, it sort of tricks our brain. And we can see how much more of the blue that I'm including on the plane itself is starting to come into play. I think that there's more work that I can do on the airplane within this painting as I continue to move forward. I can't wait to get to the glass. That's really going to add a lot. But the next step before I get into one of the brightest portions on this painting with the glass and the highlights and going in and detailing that is going to be doing the shrubbery down through here. And I'll likely add a little bit more shrubbery. I really like within the reference image, just like we saw within the big pillar in the back, all this green here. It's odd that the birds turn green. But all these little smaller patches of bushes and big palm leaves that they've got going on within this, I think are really, really nice. And I want to add a little bit more of that just to be able to break up these big, this big rock pillar that's going on within my painting. So yeah, that's a lot. This is an hour and 12 minutes. I think the last demo was 1:30, but hopefully that gives you guys an idea of how to be able to work through, build up your layers. I've shown you how to be able to jump between, you know, starting with that base shape, build down into your shadows, build your highlights, but it's still a conversation that you're having with those various layers and thinking about where the light can't really get to, right? So where it's going to be its darkest, where the shadows are really pulling at. As it starts to move away, maybe there's a little bit more of a highlight, but where it's directly in the sunlight and getting the most highlight, how to be able to work and build into those as well instead of just adding white to your painting. So I hope that this was useful for you guys this evening, and thank you so much for tuning in and watching this. Great job on the first submissions, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these first illustrations come together. Y'all have a wonderful evening.